Pioneer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For those who do not know me, my name is Brian Butcher. I'm assistant professor at the Sheptytsky Institute of Eastern Christian Studies at St. Paul University. And it is my honor to introduce Saidna, Bishop Nicholas Samra, Melkite Eparch of Newton. I took the liberty of contacting Father Francois Beiruti, as many of you may know, to get a bit of the goods on Bishop Nicholas, but he was also very forthcoming in sharing his features of his bio with us as well. Bishop Nicholas, titular bishop of Geraza, is former auxiliary bishop of Newton, although now he is the eparch. As everyone I think here knows, the Melkites are Greek Catholics of Middle Eastern extraction. Born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey, seminary educated in Massachusetts, Bishop Nicholas was ordained a priest in 1970. He served parishes in California, Illinois, and New Jersey. He founded new parishes in Orange County, California, Hammond, Indiana, Cliffside Park, New Jersey, and Delray Beach, Florida. He served various positions within his own diocese and also served as a member of the Ecumenical and Adult Religious Education Commissions in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. In 1989, he was named Auxiliary Bishop of Newton, becoming the Vicar General of his diocese. He authored and published numerous articles on Christian leadership, catechesis, ecumenism, and stewardship. He has translated and published a history of the Melkite Church in 5 volumes, and most recently has published a book called Standing on Their Shoulders on Melkite American history, and you may be aware as well, he's published a book called Stewards of the Mysteries. Bishop Samra has served 2 terms, that is 6 years, as president of the Eastern Catholic Bishops of the USA, is a member of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee for Ecumenical and Religious Affairs, Committee on Evangelization, and a member of the Orthodox Catholic Bishops Dialogue. In 1999, he chaired the Encounter of the Eastern Catholic Churches of America and Oceania, hosted by the Congregation of Eastern Churches in Rome, and we published the proceedings of that in Logos. And has chaired a similar encounter for Eastern Catholic Churches in Canada and the USA, which was held in Chicago. Well, that was the one that we published, yes? Yeah, sorry, that one, yeah. Bishop Nicholas has given lectures on ecumenism at Catholic University, USA, Catholic University Melbourne, Australia, Catholic University of Saskatoon, Notre Dame, St. Mary College, and numerous other places. I think Bishop Nicholas's accomplishments are in fact too many to name. And I asked him how many articles he had written, and he couldn't remember the number because he lost track, which is always a good sign. Bishop Nicholas is very dear to our hearts, even those of us who don't know him so well, because Father Francois Beiruti, who is now serving in California, was welcomed by Bishop Nicholas to serve there at a parish in Placentia, and he was one of our graduates from the Sheptytsky Institute. So it's my honor to welcome Bishop Nicholas to address us on Eastern Catholicism in the Middle East, 50 years after Orientalium Ecclesiarum. Ahlan sahlan Sayyidina.
Brian, you knew more about me than I did. My presentation this morning on Eastern Catholicism in the Middle East, 50 years after Vatican II's document Orientalium, Ecclesiarum, needs an introduction that begins long before Vatican II. It actually begins in the early church centuries, when the faith was being formulated in human languages, especially through the 7 ecumenical councils, as well as many other local councils. These early centuries witnessed a great discussion, many great discussions, as well as what have become known as many heresies. I speak mainly of the Church of Antioch, the major city of the Roman Empire in the East, in the area which was known as Greater Syria, present-day Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, modern-day Israel, Iraq, and parts of southern Turkey. It was the Patriarch of Antioch who had jurisdiction over this very large area. The designation of Jerusalem as a patriarchate became more honorary to a very limited area. Even though Greek was the major spoken language in the entire Roman Empire, local languages still existed, particularly in villages outside of populated cities. Aramaic and Syriac were predominant in the Christian villages and had a variety of dialects. Arabic was unknown in this area until the coming of Islam hundreds of years later, and did not become the more commonly spoken language until the 17th century, especially among Christians. Without getting into dates and council declarations, very early on, the Church of Antioch became very diverse. From its common core, numerous churches developed. The main liturgical setting of the Church of Antioch was what was known as the Liturgy of St. James the Apostle. However, others developed. The East Syrian Church used the more ancient anaphora of Addai and Mari, noted because it did not and still does not contain an announced institution narrative. A large part of the Church of Antioch followed the Nestorian issues, although today we do not use that term as a designation. The Church of the East spread from what is modern-day Iraq into the Persian Empire, Iran, and also all the way east and south to China and to India. At one point in history, it was larger in numbers than the spread of the Roman Church in the West. A very evangelical church, it almost went into extinction in many areas, but developed in others, particularly in India. The West Syrian Church developed into the Syriac Church, which through theological debates divided more. Parts of it followed the Nestorian heresy. After the Council of Chalcedon, 451, the Syriac Church divided into the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian churches. Those opposed to the council dubbed those who accepted it the Melkites, a word from Syriac, Malko, meaning the king or the emperor, or in a sense, royalists, since the emperor accepted the Chalcedonian doctrine that Jesus Christ was true God and true man. At that time, Melkite was considered a derogatory term. The non-Chalcedonians had a different understanding in the unity of Christ, God and man. And I note that it was not until almost 1900 years later that it was recognized as a mainly semantic issue and not theological. It was not a theological misunderstanding at all. Different words from different traditions. The non-Chalcedonians were not very favorable of the empire, nor Greek. Another part of the Chalcedonian church, the Melkite, now divided again into what is known as Maronite and Melkite. The Maronites at first were not pure Chalcedonians. According to some historians, of course mainly non-Maronite ones, they were for a time Monothelites, another bad word today. But for the sake of not starting a public controversy, I will not pursue the theological debate, but just emphasize two more churches became distinct. The Church of Antioch spread into Asia Minor, Cappadocia area, and gave its initial liturgical life to Constantinople, the seat of the empire, where it was more Hellenized and stylized. John Chrysostom was Patriarch of Antioch before his election to the Patriarchate of Constantinople. The Byzantine Church developed, although much of the liturgical life of Palestine passed directly to Constantinople unaltered. After the Muslim conquest in the 7th century and the Crusaders, which were initially meant to check its presence, more divisions developed. The Crusaders ousted the legitimate church leaders, patriarch and bishops, in favor of Latin appointees. The patriarch of Chalcedonian Antioch fled and took refuge in Constantinople, where his church was more Hellenized. After several hundred years, it lost its Syriac liturgical traditions to the more Hellenized traditions of Constantinople, sometimes called the Byzantine Church. Jump ahead several hundred years as we see the Church of Rome, the Latins, sending missionaries to the Middle East beginning in the 1600s. If it was considered to convert Muslims, it was not successful, because Islam prohibited conversions to Christianity and protected itself with fear of death to any Muslim who even considered conversion. In actuality, a tremendous proselytizing took place among the Orthodox faithful of Antioch, and new churches were now born of unions or communions with Rome, derogatorily called uniates, now Eastern Catholics. The Romans, or Latins, now opened their own churches, and because of the financial support from the West, won converts to the Latin Church, a poor means of evangelizing. In fact, today, the Christians of Jerusalem are still derogatorily called by the other Eastern Christians the bread Latins, because they were bought over by food and homes and clothing. To recap then, in this long introduction of mine, from the one Church of Antioch, the following developed: West Syrian, Syriac Orthodox, and Syriac Catholic; Maronite, all Catholic; Melkite Greek Catholic, and Orthodox, the Chalcedonians, known as Greek Orthodox in the East. The Orthodox branch is known as the Greek Orthodox in the East and Antiochian Orthodox in the West. In the East Syrian part of Antioch, the Chaldean Church and the Church of the East, the non-Catholic branch, which does not use the term Orthodox, but actually the Apostolic Catholic Church of the East. The Syro-Malabar Church and Orthodox branch in India, following the Chaldean tradition, and the Syro-Malankara Church in India, Catholic and Orthodox, several branches, following the West Syrian tradition. Let me add to this unique Church of Antioch now divided into different churches, the Church of Armenia, a national church, even older than the Church of the Empire. The Armenian tradition is a mixture of Syriac and Byzantine elements as it developed across Asia Minor through Cappadocia. There are two churches, Catholic and Orthodox, or sometimes called Apostolic. So what developed were 6 Orthodox churches and 7 Catholic in this one church of Antioch, not counting the proselytizing Latin church. We lost a unified church into creation of other churches that now became predominant. I take another leap into the Ottoman Empire. In order to conquer and to rule, the Ottomans, who ruled in the Middle East for 400 years, made each church a nation. In Arabic, a ta'ifat, or the other word from the Turkish, a millet, meaning a nation. The patriarchs and the bishop of each nation or community were civil heads over their individual churches. Ottomans interfered to collect head taxes from Christians, and when a Christian killed someone, then they interfered directly and not the bishop or the patriarch. I have a side note. This happened in my own family before my father was born, who was born in 1912 in Syria. His aunt's husband killed the other aunt's husband over a fight, probably drinking and playing cards, because he was mean to his wife. And in knowing that the Ottomans would come in now and kill him, the bishop of the city whisked them away to go to Egypt, where they lived very peacefully after that. I only met this part of the family about 10 years ago. They didn't know anything about why they were in Egypt. My father spilled the beans to them. All other issues among the Ottomans were resolved by the church heads. Christians were heavily taxed and even had to pay to have bishops and patriarchs recognized by the civil authorities. Thus, many patriarchs and bishops were elected more for their civil know-how rather than necessarily their spirituality. To save their own lives, many Christians learned the bad aspects of their rulers: cheating, lying, stealing. In order to deal with the Ottomans, this was necessary. Intrigue was predominant. Many bishops, priests, patriarchs, and laity died for their faith during these Ottoman times throughout the Middle East and the Balkans and in Greece. World War I, the Great War, ended the Ottoman rule, which had begun to crumble long before with the West's involvement in the Middle East. However, Christians had still learned Turkish conniving and scheming. This brings me to today, and several issues or problems that I see that are predominant. The Church of Antioch was greatly divided and very much competition took place. Jealousies abounded. Each particular church developed strong individuality, and each church saw itself as the more legitimate heir of the See of Antioch. 3 Catholic patriarchs and 2 Orthodox patriarchs claimed the title of Patriarch of Antioch and all the East. Competition and rivalries developed among the churches, each group thinking itself more authentic than the others. With the entrance of the Latin religious communities, the Jesuits, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, and others, each church had to struggle to keep its own faithful, because the Latins began to build churches and homes for the people, in a sense, buying them to accept the Latin Church. Instead of all Christians working together for education and schools, each church attempted to open their own schools in the cities as well as in small villages where several churches existed. Protestant churches, who were financially supported by the West, particularly by the United States. Again, money, homes, food, support distracted Eastern Christians away from their proper roots and traditions. Orthodox faithful were greatly disarmed, and Eastern Catholics were born of divisions from their mother churches and were greatly Latinized. In the Vatican II decree, of which we are presently speaking, recognition of each particular church was noted. It speaks of the rights of the Catholic Church, and not as the Eastern rights of the Catholic, as if the Catholic Church was Latin. This was a great change in thinking. There is equal dignity among the churches, none superior to the other, quoted in Orientalium, Ecclesiarum, Latin included. But recognition of this fact would take years to develop, coming out of hundreds of years of oppression and a great loss for their faithful. The document says, the unity of action and common endeavor to sustain common tasks so as to safeguard more effectively the ordered way of life took many more years to expand, and it is still not flourishing. Vatican II calls for the Eastern Catholic churches to rule themselves. This is still delayed and impeded because of Roman interference. I note, as aside, when you have an authority above what you consider the high authority, when the lower levels among the clergy don't like what their authority says, they then turn around and go to the higher authority above the high authority. And now you get the interference going on. And I have to note, not with all the details, but at the present time our synod is in this quagmire. In the last several years, we've had direct interference from Roman authorities in 5 or 6 of our dioceses throughout the Middle East because of a group of disgruntled priests who didn't like their bishop and went above the head of the synod and above the head of the patriarch and went to Rome. For instance, right now, our bishop in Jordan, a very decent man, was given a Latin Rite auxiliary with full authority over his head. And he is the bishop to wear the crown and celebrate the services. But the Latin Rite auxiliary runs his church. The document calls the churches to preserve their legitimate liturgical rite and their established way of life. This is still lacking. Due to excessive Latinization, theologically as well as liturgically. There is more to dressing up Eastern Catholics in Orthodox clothes and calling them legitimate to their proper traditions. It's an internal change that must take place. I cannot speak for all the churches of this divided Antioch, but I can speak for one, my own, the Greek Melkite. After Vatican II, our synod returned in 1968 to the practice of communicating newly baptized and chrismated children, a minor thing you would think. But you will still see throughout the whole Middle East First Communion ceremonies at the age of 7 throughout the Patriarchate, even though the synod changed. They may now call them solemn communion, but let us not be fooled. Ask the laity what is being celebrated. First Communion. The identity has not totally been integrated. The U.S. eparchy that I now head instituted this in 1970 with the coming of Archbishop Joseph Tuil, a council father. And we took great pains in those years to re-educate our faithful in this matter. After Tawil, the custom redeveloped in a few parishes with a few priests, mainly coming from the Middle East, that why should we follow what the bishop says when the Middle East still does these ceremonies? And just 3 years ago, when I assumed the eparchial bishop role, I had to rewrite and reissue a pastoral letter on this very issue, a little stronger than the first time around. The Feast of Corpus Christi, a distinct Latin feast, was adopted by the Melkite Church soon after its communion with Rome in 1724. It was discussed at our synod after Vatican II, looking to what Vatican II was saying. Go back to your proper traditions. It was discussed. And the bishops concurred, yes, it was a Latinization, but chose to keep it on the calendar. First of all, because whoever wrote the text for it put it into a Byzantine style from the Typicon. But they also chose to keep it on the calendar and even making it a first-class feast with a pre-feast and an after-feast. Their reasoning was still Latinized, but it boiled down to its social aspect in some eparchies, a religious procession enhanced with street fairs of food and dancing and even carnival atmosphere for the Feast of Corpus Christi. We still have issues with Rome's involvement in the election of bishops within and outside of the traditional patriarchate, which Rome seems to still see as the lines of the Ottoman Empire. I guess Rome didn't know that the Ottoman Empire collapsed. In 1995, the Congregation for the Eastern Churches issued a document titled Instruction for the Application of the Liturgical Prescriptions of the Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches. A long title. I will not get into all of the prescriptions, but it is clear that pains should be taken to return to the legitimate customs of the Eastern Churches. This, to me, is one of the best documents that came from Rome on this subject. However, to date, our synod still has not talked about it, and I ask that it be put on the agenda every year. And not only that, but the only church giving communion to infants in this whole Church of Antioch after baptism and chrismation is the Melkite Church. It appears as if the other churches and the other synods haven't even read it, or if they have, just ignored it, by refusing children to participate in the Lord's Eucharistic table. And that's just one of many prescriptions and traditions that need to be reintroduced. I comment no further on that. The question of the date of Pascha still remains an issue. As you know, Christians are laughed at and mocked by Islam because we generally have two Paschas. Islam considers this a scandal and see our divisions. They don't see their own divisions, but they see ours. But sometimes, not seeing their own divisions, they pick on us more. And yet it remains a scandal that after so long we cannot agree on a date. The Vatican II decree states, quote, that the patriarchs or supreme authorities of a place come to an agreement, unquote, but it adds, by unanimous consent and combined counsel of those affected to celebrate the feast of Easter on the same Sunday. This has worked quite well for the Melkite Church in Egypt, or all the Christian churches in Egypt and in Jordan, where all churches celebrate Pascha with the Orthodox churches. But it was mainly the civil government who got this to work. You have to remember that this millet system made the church a civil government. So it was very involved. Politics and church are very, very heavily involved in the Middle East, even till this day. We don't understand that so easily coming from the Western world where we separate them. In the Holy Land, Melkites celebrate both dates according to the majority faithful, although this may change in 2015, when hopefully all Catholic Christians will celebrate on Orthodox Pascha date. When Pope, now St. John Paul II, visited Syria after the year 2000, the common date of Pascha surfaced. There was an attempt for all churches to be unified and celebrate with the Orthodox. Initially, there was argument, and then there was agreement. However, after the agreement, the Armenian Catholics in Syria pulled back because their sister Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, had accepted to celebrate the Western date internationally. So now they would be divided. Then the Syrian Church and the Maronite churches reneged because across the borders, a few miles away in Lebanon, they would not be in line with their local churches there. The Melkite Patriarch remained adamant and remained committed. But after long discussion, maybe argument, Rome recommended, or maybe imposed, that there should be unanimity among the churches in one country. So we remain the laughing stock of Islam, crucifying and raising Christ twice. Orientalium Ecclesiarum speaks about relations with the Orthodox churches and urges Eastern Catholics, quote, to promote the unity of all Christians, especially Eastern Christians, unquote. The means it offers are, quote, prayers, example of their lives, by religious fidelity to the ancient Eastern traditions, by a greater knowledge of each other, by collaboration and a brotherly regard for objects and feelings, unquote. The document admits orthodoxy, or the Orthodox people, to the mysteries of penance, Eucharist, and anointing of the sick, if they ask of their own accord, and if needed, because of no Catholic priest. A Catholic may receive the same from an Orthodox priest, if the priest is so disposed to do so. Here I note that in the Metropolitan Archdiocese of Aleppo, when through Russia the Esed Dam was built many years ago on the Euphrates River, it created a new city out there, and many people left the city hours away to go live and work at that new area, which was now prospering. The Melkite Church was built, and an Armenian Catholic Church was built. Both of them today have been dethroned of their crosses and Islamic flags put on them, because it is the headquarters of in Raqqa of ISIS or ISIL, however you want to name it. But there were Melkites and Orthodox. The Orthodox Bishop of Aleppo went at least once or twice a year to greet and celebrate liturgy with his Orthodox faithful. And he did it, of course, in the Melkite Church. And the Melkite priest concelebrated with him. And Melkite and Orthodox faithful received Eucharist from the Orthodox bishop. So we can't say that there wasn't dual communion, even of late. At a recent ordination of a priest just several weeks ago in Placentia, California, a visiting Syriac Orthodox priest approached the Eucharistic table along with my Melkite priest at the time of communion. And several years ago, when our patriarch was here in California, the Syriac Orthodox bishop in California, Eugene Kaplan, also approached the Eucharistic table with our patriarch. Two popes visited Syria and Lebanon in the past decades. St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI. Both called for a greater working relationship among the churches. First among the Catholics, who were so divided and still trying to prove who was more real. And also with the Orthodox, to give witness to the one Christian faith in prayer and practice. When John Paul II went to Syria, the Committee of Bishops and Patriarchs, Catholics, were working for his trip. And Patriarch Ignatius IV of Antioch, Greek Orthodox Patriarch, politely said to our Patriarch, "I insist that I participate with you to welcome His Holiness, and I want him to come to my cathedral, and when he does, I will ride with him in the Pope-mobile too." There is some humor still out there. Both went beyond the Catholic communities, these popes, to our Orthodox brothers and sisters in the faith. A communion that is tarnished, but can be polished and relived in a united church. All Eastern Catholics and Orthodox were urged to work together, to use common facilities, have common mission together, and to break down barriers of separation. The Balaman University now has many Catholic students there. The Maronite University of Holy Spirit in Kaslik has many Orthodox students there. We're finally working, trying to bring together one church in a village that Christians of all traditions and even Muslims participate in. This brings me to a final point in this presentation: ecumenism, called for by Vatican II in Orientalium, Ecclesiarum, and other documents as well. In the past several decades, the issue that I mentioned of diversity, competition, proselytizing have been greatly discussed and met head-on through the formation of gatherings of patriarchs and bishops. Conferences were formed, and even Orthodox Catholic meetings now take place among the hierarchs. Vatican II assisted the Eastern Catholic communities to a stronger working relationship for common issues, such as religious education, social gatherings, conferences and conventions, and service-related programs, particularly of charity. The Melkite Church went into a major retranslation of the Arabic texts. The initial Arabic translations of our liturgical texts were very old, before we even knew Arabic very well. So they were out of date language-wise. It's interesting when you see some of the old Arabic books. We didn't know all the words because Arabic was not a Christian language, although used by the Christians in the South, a small group. It was developed by Islam. And when you see some of the words, I was called by the Detroit Institute of Art several years ago because they had purchased a manuscript from a London bookseller. And they knew it was a Christian book, handwritten. So I went, they locked me in a room with several people so I wouldn't steal it. I opened it up and I chuckled, and the lady, Ettinger, I don't know what background she is, but whatever that is, was fluent in reading Arabic. And she said to me, "I can't figure out the title of this book." So I looked at it and I chuckled and I said, "You told me you know Arabic." She said, "I do, but what's that?" It had a kitab al-Afashin. I said, "You don't know what the word Afashin means in Arabic?" She said, "No." So I chuckled. I said, "Well, it's really not Arabic. It's Greek." We didn't know the word for prayer in Arabic yet when these were written. So the word for prayer in Greek is evchi. Evchi is hard to say in Arabic, so they say evshi. Like cherubim is cherubim in Arabic. Okay, so she said, well, how do you get efeshin? I said, they took it and made evchi a broken Arabic plural, efeshin. So they pluralized the Greek word. And then she said, well, what's this other one? It had, she could figure out, it was the book of liturgies of St. John Chrysostom and Basil the Great. And then it had El Progiasmena, written in Arabic. She said, what's the Progiasmena? I said, that's another Arabic word. It means pre-sanctified liturgy. We didn't know how to say it then. So we used the Greek word, Progiasmena, written in Arabic. She opened up the book, and where the Lord is God, it was written Theos Kyrios in Arabic, Theos Kyrios. They used all these Greek terms in our books because we didn't know Arabic well yet. So we did a new translation of the Arabic in the last 10 years. We have books that are about this wide. You know, to celebrate a Byzantine office, you need a wheelbarrow to go to church. Well, there's about this many books now, large print and small print. And the Orthodox now are using them. Patriarch said to our patriarch, do you mind if I use your books? You have a fantastic translation. God bless you, use them. So there is a working relationship. A greater focus was placed on working together. This continues to escalate in the past few years, especially with the internal strife now with Islam, now overflowing severely to affect the Christian presence in the land of its birth and growth. A new genocide is happening. Initially, after the partial communions of some Orthodox churches with Rome, there was great strife within each liturgical family. One patriarch paying the Ottomans money to go kill the other one, and vice versa, and the bishops. However, the Catholic churches slowly began to see that partial unions were not the most praiseworthy, and a greater working relationship developed between our Orthodox brothers and sisters and us Catholics. A great change took place within the Roman Church, and it slowly filtered down into the Eastern Catholics too. Papal concern began to grow, particularly since St. John the 23rd, Venerable Paul VI, St. John Paul II, and now Benedict XVI, and presently Pope Francis. Meetings went just beyond polite hellos and nice words. We began to speak to each other after 1,000 years. There has been a breakdown to understand how East and West were one and united for 1,000 years. New studies developed. I will speak specifically about my church again, the Greek Melkite Catholic, and our goals for unity with the Greek Orthodox Church of Antioch, known in the West as Antiochian Orthodox. The Melkite Church took an important role in Vatican II, as we heard Father Brian Daly and from Father John Erickson, and I thank you for patting Melkite Church on the back so I didn't have to do it, and the Melkite Church acted as a synod of bishops in their preparations concerning all documents and as a united hierarchy at the council under the leadership of Patriarch Maximus. The preparation work, discourses, and memorandum of the Patriarch and his hierarchs have now finally been published in English by Sophia Press. 50 years later, it took a long time to do it. I have it here. And we published this year at our eparchy. It was lost. The translation 25 years ago was misplaced. And there was a little dispute between the bishop and the priest who was working on it, and it got lost. By the time I found it and got it back, and 4 years ago reworked the whole editing of it myself, it took a little while. Then I got called to take over the diocese, so it got put on the back burner for another 2 more years. I worked on it every day for the whole winter that I was living in California, from the great translation that we had from French. Publication was this year in commemoration of Vatican II, 50 years later, although Father Robert Taft wrote the introduction to it 25 years ago. He's happy to see it out, however. You may obtain it from our website, melkai.org, or any of our other books under Sophia Press. It's more apropos today than it was at the time of Vatican II, when I reread this book. So many of the things that are being said in there today are finally resurfacing, particularly in the West, with the better understanding that the Orthodox Church is a church. In 1975, a prophetic voice arose in the Melkite Synod. Archbishop Elias Zugby of Baalbek, Lebanon, was already known at Vatican II for his forward thinking, particularly the Eastern Church's concept of divorce and remarriage. He now proposed to his synod a project of double communion with Rome and Orthodoxy for his Melkite Church. It would allow that the Greek Melkite Catholic Church to reunite with Greek Orthodox Church of Antioch while remaining in communion with Rome. Initially, the majority of Synod Fathers were not very enthusiastic about the project. Rome, too, had objections. The Catholic and Orthodox Synods formed a joint commission to study the project, but the long, disastrous Lebanese war hindered much progress. In 1981, the prophetic Zugby again spoke up and published a small book, Tous Schismatiques, published in English as We Are All Schismatics. It was welcomed by ecumenists, but frowned upon by Rome, because it questioned the recognition of the infallibility of Vatican I. Zugby quoted Pope Paul VI, who qualified the Council of Lyon as the sixth of the general synods of the West. Venerable John Paul VI did so Zugby extended this thinking to Vatican I. 20 years passed, and ecumenical ideas matured with Vatican II and the popes, now St. John the 23rd, Venerable Paul VI, and John Paul II. Great changes took place. Zugby renewed his project of double communion, now known as the Zugby Initiative internationally. He wrote a short 31-page booklet, Orthodox uni, oui. Uniat, no. United Orthodox, yes. Uniate, no. It contained a short profession of faith. 1, I believe everything which Eastern Orthodoxy teaches. 2, I am in communion with the Bishop of Rome, in the limits recognized to the first among the bishops by the Holy Fathers of the East during the first millennium before the separation. An Orthodox theologian, Archbishop George Chudr of Byblos in Batroun, Lebanon, was satisfied with this profession of faith. It was also accepted and ascribed to by another member of the Orthodox Catholic dialogue in Antioch, Archbishop Cyril Bustris of the Melkite Catholics, my immediate predecessor, now Metropolitan Archbishop of Beirut. 25 of 27 bishops present at the Melkite Synod in 1995 signed the document. You had to see how it was done. Zugby knew that if he brought it up publicly, they would jump on him. He was a beautiful person, a good friend of mine. He gave me some vestments and different things, and I was sworn to secrecy, but I couldn't tell the other bishops that he gave them to me. And he went with this little piece of paper folded up with this profession of faith to every bishop during coffee hour or break time or lunchtime. Read it, sign it, read it, sign it, read it, sign it. 25 of 27 bishops signed it to, God bless them, no comment. Patriarch Maximus V at the time, Hakim, didn't think it was so outrageous and he didn't see any problem with it himself. So he sent it to the Orthodox Patriarch Ignatius IV and was surprised with his enthusiastic response to proceed with the study by his synod. Then the Melkite Synod spent several days of its 1996 synod to study more, and unanimously adopted the project and issued a document calling for an end to divisions of the two churches. It emphasized that we were not giving in to one or the other, that we were going to come together and reconcile, that one was not more important than the other, that the divisions that took place were much more civil than religious, and that there were much more politics involved than just church. The Orthodox Synod reacted with a serious study and emphasized that Antiochian unity could not be separated from the restoration of communion with Rome and all of Orthodoxy. I add a note that one cannot deny that there was a double communion in Antioch in the 1600s and 1700s, before the full communion with part of the Church of Antioch in 1724. There were several Orthodox bishops who came into communion with Rome and were still part of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. Latin missionaries were invited when they entered into the lands of the Middle East. They were invited by the Orthodox bishops to confess and communicate Orthodox faithful. Remember, our clergy had no education under the Ottomans. We didn't have a seminary. We weren't permitted. So we educated very simple men without much theological background. So they welcomed these Latin missionaries to preach in our churches, to communicate and confess the people. This was with the Orthodox Patriarch's permission. Ecumenists and many others saw the Zugby initiative as a door opener. Numerous articles appeared internationally. In 1997, a letter to the Melkite Patriarch Synod was presented by three: Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, Achille Cardinal Silvestrini, and Edward Cardinal Cassidy, representing the pontifical dicasteries of Doctrine of the Faith, Eastern Churches, and Council for Christian Unity, respectively. Although many interpreted this letter a rejection of the project, it gave in reality reflections to continue this dialogue with caution. Proof of this came on September 29, 1998, when John Paul II met with the Eastern Catholic Patriarchs and strongly encouraged them to help restore full unity with Orthodox churches. St. John Paul asked them to seek with him the most suitable forms of Petrine ministry, engaging them and also Orthodox patriarchs and theologians in a patient and fraternal dialogue on the ways to exercise this ministry of uniting. Basically, he said and recognized that the Pope was the issue of disunity, in a sense. So let's talk about how my ministry can be adapted and properly understood. Such an important dialogue has ups and downs. We see this also in the International Orthodox Catholic Dialogue, as well as its forerunner, the North American. A damper arose once again over Antiochian dialogue toward unity, but a new sign appeared just this year. The horrific war in Syria and the near extermination of Christianity in Iraq, the instability of all the countries of the Middle East, in Egypt and in Palestine, and the severe rivalries among the Sunni and Shiite Muslims, even spilling over once again to Lebanon, which had a majority of Christians until its disastrous war, now threatens its existence and its Christian faithful. These issues bring a new impetus of the need of walking together, working together, and healing our age-old problems. The new Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch, John X, met with Melkite Patriarch Gregorius III and asked him, "May I visit your Melkite Synod in June?" He brought up also, we need to look once again at the Zugby Initiative. It was a great day on June 19, 2014, when Patriarch John X arrived at Ain Trez, Lebanon, at our synod with 3 of his metropolitans and secretary to meet and speak brotherly love to us, the Melkites, and he spoke strongly for unity. Melkite Patriarch Gregorius III, along with other Eastern Catholic and Orthodox patriarchs of Antioch, participated at a special conference on the Church of Antioch in July 2014 at the Orthodox University in Balamand and Monastery. They were also welcome to visit at the Greek Orthodox Synod days later. Another great ecumenist is the newly elected Moran Moor Ignatius Ephraim, Patriarch of the Syriac Orthodox Church of Antioch. Now just 48 years old, he served as Archbishop of the Eastern Diocese of his church in the United States for 18 years, and a member of Christian Churches Together, the largest group of ecumenists in the USA. Good days, bad days, ups, downs, rigidity, flexibility, enthusiasm, calmness. Yet we are on a new road to unity with the ancient Church of Antioch, which is now spread worldwide. Orientalium Ecclesiarum of Vatican II is somewhat a weak document, but it inaugurated a stronger belief for working church relationships as well as the need of unity. Could we ask for more? Thank you for your kind attention.
For questions. So leave time for coffee break before the panel sessions. So please, Andrew, and then Pani.
Right. So I just wanted to thank you for your presentation, really thorough, and gave a lot of good ups and downs of the whole history. I just had a question. I've always been really interested in Tawil's initiatives in the United States in terms of post-Vatican II reform of the Eastern Catholic churches. And I was wondering if you could give us maybe like a little on-the-ground perspective as a young priest seeing Tawil. What was the reception like of things like Courage to Be Ourselves? What did that look like? Was it a war? Was it a revolution? What was it?
Tawil was a very interesting man, coming from the Middle East without ever being in the United States to serve. He had blinders on in many respects, but good blinders, because he came from Egypt where they had the several ecumenists working together, Zugbi, Hakim, and himself, and then Edelby got involved, the School of Cairo, they called it. And he believed seriously in this. And he wrote that first pastoral letter, which he expanded, and I published his book for him after he died, The Courage to Be Ourselves. It's not won over by everybody. Even some of our bishops. We still have difficulties. We're outgrowing the divisions, and we're outgrowing the Ottoman Empire, and we're outgrowing Latinization. So it takes a long time. On the whole, it's been working. It's been working. Most of our churches have been doing better. I've been bishop of the diocese 3 years. I'm putting out a lot of fires. So it's not very easy. It's not very easy. But it's being re-emphasized again. My 2 predecessors really didn't get that big into it. They had different thinkings. So, my 3 predecessors actually, after him. So it was a little difficult. We're on the road to recovery, I think, and we're trying to get ahead.
Thank you for the lecture. It was wonderful. It was very interesting. My question to you, and it was implied by other speakers at this conference, that the Orientalium Ecclesiarum had weaknesses. In what way can Eastern churches correct this? What should they do? And what should be the process and procedures? And how should we appeal to Rome? Or should we start with ourselves?
I think, Roma, they have to take it very seriously and read what it says. It's a weak document, for sure, we know that. But there are some very good points in it. and then later re-emphasized by Rome in other thinkings, particularly in the dialogue that has taken place since then, since Vatican II. And they each have to look at it very seriously and try to live it, and to make it work, to put it into effect. We did it in one sense in Damascus and in Aleppo, where Orthodox and Melkites built common churches, 2 churches, one in Aleppo, one in Damascus. We needed a new church and a new section. So each one of us had people there. We band together, we made a committee, we built one church. They have the Melkite liturgy at one time and the Orthodox liturgy at another time, and both bishops know that the people are crisscrossing. You have to understand that in the church in Antioch, the Melkite church, particularly all of the Middle Eastern churches, no one is without Orthodox brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins. Everybody's intermarried. And no one ever questioned when a woman got married, if she was Orthodox, and her Melkite husband, she followed him, and vice versa, and nobody questioned that. When the new law came out, we had difficulties with Rome over that, and we didn't follow it. You just have to accept the local custom is very, very much alive. The situation of the present situation, because of the war going on right now, has created disaster. And it's probably pulling us together to work a little bit more together. When you have a common enemy, it brings the brothers a little closer. Yes.
I'd like to follow that up, because what you're saying in effect is that there's no gospel without culture. It's something we're learning in the churches, throughout history. When the Special Commission on Orthodox Participation in the World Council of Churches was doing its work from 1999 to 2001, when we had our meeting in Damascus, it was like an astonishing revelation for those coming from North America, where these divisions are, like a traffic jam, because we were told that the Eastern churches of the Levant had no trouble with the Middle Eastern Council of Churches at all, that everything was fraternal, that people got along extremely well, and it was all because of the local culture, and that this should somehow be an instructive model for the rest of us. Now, there's also the factor of personality. Ignatius IV was a heroic person, and really trying to encourage this kind of thing too, but mostly it was attributed to the local culture. Do you think that what you're talking about with these experiences in the East could be transferred to the work in North America? And I'll just conclude with the remark that if I were to tell you the story of the Eastern Catholic churches and the Canadian Council of Churches, it would be practically the same story you just told.
The problem with that is, because Orthodoxy in the United States is not Antiochian, are not just by themselves. They're with the Greeks and the Russians and the Serbs and the Bulgarians and the OCA. So there's a stronger camaraderie with them there. But in the Middle East, where we're all one, of the same background, it's a little easier. For instance, the former Metropolitan of blessed memory, Metropolitan Philip Saliba, good friend of mine, and anytime we were together, he would pressure me to give the blessing at the meal in his own churches. When his patriarch came, I left my own church in Michigan, where I was living, and went up to be with them at their liturgy. I sat at the first bench. I wasn't going to insult anyone. After the Orthros Matins were over, the patriarch went in to vest, and the Archbishop Metropolitan called me up and gave me his throne. And I sat at the throne for the whole liturgy, which, if some other Orthodox saw that, some Greeks, they would have, strangled me at that on the throne. So there is a difference. So it's difficult in the U.S. We do have some good relations, and it's growing. The new Archbishop Joseph is, again, a very open man and working with us. When he introduced me at a banquet a couple of years ago, I was shocked. He knew more about me than I knew about myself. So I don't know where he got the information from. So we do try to work together. I was just in touch with him to visit and to set up some kind of working relationship with our churches. So this is where we are. I just wanted to mention two little brief things. not to get into the politics of the Middle East, but Bashar al-Assad, the president, was raised in Melkite schools his whole life. In the year 2000, we had a synod, partially in Damascus and partially in Lebanon. That was the first time in Syria for hundreds of years. He took us, on the end, up to his palace in limousines, and he spoke to us very bluntly and politely. And he says, I'm going to give you each time to talk. However, please don't bring up the schools. In the 60s, his father took all of the parochial schools away, made them national. He said, don't bring up the schools. I know my father gave you a few back, but please don't bring it up. He said, I was raised in your schools, and I must confess that the best education was in the Catholic schools in Syria. He said, however, if I give you all your schools back, I have to allow ikhwanna, which means our brothers, but it's the word they use for the brotherhood, the radicals. He said, I have to allow our radicals to have their parochial schools, and if they do, they will destroy our country. He said, so please don't bring that up. He himself used to go weekly to Saydnaya, the very famous monastery of the icon of the Mother of God that St. Luke painted, whose memory we have today, outside of Damascus. And above Saydnaya is a monastery called Cherubim. To go up there, you would close your eyes if somebody was driving the car, because it was this narrow road and you could fall down the mountain very easily if somebody slipped on their car, with their car wheels. He loved this place for prayer and meditation weekly. He built a super highway to go up to the top of the mountain, to go up to Saydnaya, to Cherubim. So the man built the building of a mosque right next to our church in Damascus and Dumbar when we built the Orthodox Catholic Church. And a mosque was going to be built. As soon as we built churches, they'd build mosques. So the vicar called him up. He was a good friend of him. And he says, President, I need a piece of land in such and such a district. Syria gives land to churches and to Islam for mosques and churches. Free. He says, fine, but what do you want a piece of land there for? He said, I want to build a church. So the president said, but Bishop, there's not one Christian there. He said, I know. But why are they going to build a mosque in Dumar where there's not one Muslim? Bashar called him the next day and said, Bishop, no mosque will be built. He has protected Christians. So this is the problem. We can't talk so vibrantly out there because every time our bishop in Aleppo spoke to the Italian press when they asked him, when they started to hit Aleppo, and he said he would hope that the West would get these rebels out because the rebels are from Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Chechens, creating fire with the Syrians too, of course. But they were the ones behind it. And he says, I would hope they would help get these rebels out. That night, our bishop's residence was bombed. One priest lost an eye and at the point of death for months. The bishop had to move. He moved to the Franciscan house, which then got bombed 3 more times. So we can't speak. It's a very difficult situation. Very, very difficult. I leave the rest. I think we're done with questions.
Join me in thanking Sam.
Yeah.